Greetings, everybody. How's everyone doing? Pray everyone is well. And beautiful day out here, as you can see. And not bad for a few days before Christmas Day. So pretty decent December day. So I wanted to talk to you all today about something I just really kind of come to know what it is here recently myself. A white funeral. Have you ever heard of a white funeral? No one really even likes to talk about funerals at all, but in this case, a white funeral is a good thing. White funeral refers to, like in the life of a believer, that as we begin through our relationship with Jesus and that sanctifying process, that He is causing the ways of this world to die within us. Like the Bible tells us that we should crucify the flesh, that the old man must die and the new man must come. We have to take off the old and put on the new. And this is part of the process. But when the old ways and the old part of you, which sometimes is very ingrained in you and who you were, that you didn't even really realize that it was such a part of you, that it actually hurts when it leaves you. That the mourning process comes of it, like mourning of a death. And that's kind of the idea behind it. It's a white funeral. But as we take off the sinful ways of the world, the sinful nature, and put on the ways of the Spirit, that's the process of being born again. These are like little born agains along the way, where the old thing has died and the new thing has come, and the new has come to life. And that old thing that was harmful, or I don't know, harmful is good, but definitely maybe not God's best for you, maybe contrary to His word and how we're supposed to live our lives, how we're supposed to treat one another, how we're supposed to worship Him. So as that old thing dies and the new comes to life and you're reborn again in that area, that we are to celebrate that death with mourning it properly, but also understanding that you have been born again to new life in those areas. So even though it's a death and requires mourning, it's to be celebrated for its holiness and its purity, thus why it's white. So recently, a friend of mine posted a thing on Facebook that he wrote out talking about, white funeral moment in his life. And, it's a true part of his story, his testimony. And you know how God provides certain things when you need Him the most, when you're kind of walking through and struggling and something needs to hit you here. This is one of those things that hit me right where I needed it, when I needed it most. So the best thing I can do is just read this letter to you and imagine in your mind, my friend, he's Scottish. So imagine his cool Scottish drawl as he reads this. So envision his voice while I'm doing it. And just a couple things just to know. These are things he's shared. That he grew up in Scotland and he grew up to a real poor family. And some of his story talks about how hard that was growing up and what it's like to grow up kind of poor in Scotland. And basically, he lets you, as he puts it, what you used to drink, fight, and hang out at the pub. That was life. And so he eventually came to the States, got saved, and today, today's good, but this is a part of that story along the way. And like I said, it really hit me where I needed it today, and I pray that it touches you in the same way. A white funeral. So when Daniel, my son with Down syndrome, was born, I was devastated. It's shameful to admit, but I had a dream, you see. I had only been a Christian for less than 2 years, and I came out of a violent, broken home, married 6 weeks after my 17th birthday to my pregnant girlfriend, and that year, my first son, he died. A year and a half later, my second son was born. Beautiful child, but born to a hard-hearted father. When he was 2, my wife had to come looking for me in a pub so she could get money for groceries. She had left her son with my dad, and I was mad that she'd come into the pub. I told her that I'd be out, and I sat there and deliberately drank the couple of vodkas that were still sitting in front of me and hanging out with the guys that I was with who thought it was really quite funny. So I walked out of there into the daylight, and I'd been in there for a number of hours. It was about 4:30 on a Friday afternoon. So we got the groceries, got in a taxi, and went home. I walked into our apartment to screams. Just minutes before, my father had dropped a full kettle of boiling water over my 2-year-old beautiful son. He had managed to get him into the bathtub and was trying to pour cold water over him when my wife ran out in hopes of finding a neighbor who had a phone, and I pushed my dad out of the way and saw my son trying to pull off what looked like Swiss cheese, like a sweater. In the ambulance, there was a voice screaming in my spirit. That voice was not my own. It said to me, "He's ruined. He's ruined." Now, 11 years later, I'd been saved for for about 1.5 years. And all the way through my wife's pregnancy, I had a fantasy. I just knew that it was going to be a girl. Angie didn't want to know, so I used to try and bribe the girl who would take the scans, but she wouldn't do it. You know, woman power and unity and all that. No matter. I knew it was going to be a girl, and she was going to be special. I knew I was going to be the best dad in the world, you know, now that my life was right with Jesus. I had a new heart, and one that could actually love and could feel. That's a majestic miracle in and of itself. "It's a boy," I heard, Mr. McElhaney. Could I have a quick word with you? I left my wife lying on the table as she just had her 3rd C-section. So I went back to the back of the room, and here's what the doctor said. "I do not usually do this, but I am 100% certain that your son has Down syndrome. Do you and your wife still want to have her tubes tied?" So without even giving it a second thought or even asking Angie, I answered numbly, yes. This was also a Friday. And so I mourned, and I mourned for the daughter that was not to be. And this is what I would like to talk about: letting dreams die, fantasies die, the distance between expectations, dreams, visions, and so on, and reality can be like a chasm as wide as the Grand Canyon. For the most part, our dreams are not grounded in reality, very often just wishful thinking. Yet we live in a culture that promotes pursuing our dreams. Most dreams come straight out of our own desires for the kind of life that we think that we want or that we think that we deserve. It has caused murder and mayhem in relationships, brought violence and divorce, and children flinging their lives into the wind. But here's the thing about Christians, though. We have been bought by a price. Is that not right? There's one who shapes our lives for his will and his good pleasure. It is no longer we that live, but that he lives in us. Is that not what we tell people? It is one thing to tell that truth, that abstract truth, but it's quite another thing to live it. The white funerals of our lives are part and parcel of our sanctification. Like the elephant's graveyard, this is a place where we die to our own plans and ambitions, no matter how righteous they appear. It is God who calls us, and it is He who is the captain of our souls. So when we find our delight in the Lord, the captain of our souls, He then gives us the desires of our hearts, and He brings that to pass. And not the desires that arose from our flesh, that made demands upon us, and then those demands became the measuring instruments of all things, and by which all things that we fall short. The distance between our own expectations and our reality, as far as the east is from the west. The Sunday after Daniel was born, I went to church, very much a broken man. As I drove there that morning, all I could say to God was, "You have to speak to me or I won't survive this." So guess what morning that was? Baby dedication. Beautiful, perfect babies. And they only did this a couple times a year. So I sat down in the middle of a row And in that row, the seat beside me was empty. At some point, there were tears pouring down my face. The person in the closest seat to me reached over and nudged me and handed me a note. I looked up and took the note. Then while I noticed a young woman standing in the aisle, she had obviously sent the letter down to me. I could not help notice, the note said, that you were crying. Is there anything that I can pray with you about? I looked at her, and she looked at me. I realized I was captive, and that the empty seat beside me was sealing my fate. I would have to talk to her. She came down the aisle and sat next to me and whispered to me, "So what's wrong?" I looked at her, and I told her that I just had a child who had been born with Down syndrome. She gave me a confused look, as if she did not know what that meant. I felt anger and resentment rising in me. I had no desire to explain this to this young woman, not a single thing, let alone explain to her about Down syndrome, which I literally knew nothing about. At that very moment, time stood still. I could not explain it any other way. Suddenly, I was looking at Jesus, and he had that same confused look on his face. And these are the words that are forever emblazoned on my heart for all eternity. I do not know what Down syndrome is either. All I know is that I have given you a perfect gift from the treasures of heaven. Right there, I had my wife's funeral. All the thoughts of the girl that should have been were extricated from my mind, and an explosion of love rocked my heart. I had discovered the Lord's plan for me, and it was life-changing for myself, my wife, my oldest son. It changed my mother, my father, and it has changed so many people's lives. This plan of God wrought through this perfect gift from the treasures of heaven. Now, there have been other things in my life that have had to die, and some of them were not easy. And this one had taken me years to work out. What white funeral needs to take place in your life? What dreams or ambitions born from your own desires need to die? The picking up of the cross, death to self, very often is a death to heartfelt dreams, and not in any way bad, just not God's will for you. What needs to die upon your cross today? So as I read that, my heart was moved. My heart was pricked with that conviction that only can come from God. And I responded to him on Facebook, and it's the same way I'll respond to you today. That I guess as I look at, my white funeral, what needs to be put upon my cross as I pick up and carry my cross every day is me. And I guess I die hard. How about you? What things do you need to crucify in the flesh? What things in your life, not necessarily bad, but not God's will for your life, need to die in your life so that you can follow his will, so that he can have freedom to openly live and guide your life the way he wants to? It's a big question, and I ask that each one of you would take time to ponder that. I'll put a link to this post, and you can read it for yourself, and maybe share it if you feel so inclined. But think about that today. What in you needs to be crucified on that cross? What in you needs to be put to death and given God allow the room and allow him to resurrect his dreams and plans for your life? Let him resurrect and bring to fulfillment in your world. So I pray God is with you. I pray God's hand upon you. I pray he blesses you, and whatever his will is for you, that he brings it to its fullness in your life. And by doing so, you can bring the fruit of the Spirit. The fullness of peace and joy is only found in Jesus, found on the cross. So God bless. We'll talk to y'all soon.